Welcome to our very first Local 4 News podcast. I'm Local 4 News Director Mike Mickle, and we are tackling a very tough topic today. Many of you may have just watched the documentary When the Killer Comes Clean, and I am sitting across the table from one of the most courageous women I've ever met in my life, Vicki Crompton-Tetter. Of course, her beautiful daughter Jenny lost her life in a brutal act of rage at the hands of her former boyfriend. Vicki, thanks so much for joining me.
You're welcome.
You just watched the documentary.
Yes.
So what's going through your mind right now?
A lot of sadness and a lot of, I don't know, confusion, just a lot of emotions, a lot of going back in time and reliving again, thinking about Jenny again, thinking about Mark, I guess almost questioning again, did we do the right thing, in parenting. I mean, there's so many emotions going through my mind.
We did this interview a few years ago,
Yes.
and you were telling me before you sat down to watch it that some of the answers he gave you, you'd kind of block those out of your memory even since then.
Yeah, it is amazing to me that some painful information, my mind does block out because I had forgotten what he had told me about those last moments of Jenny's life. And I guess that is my body taking good care of me because I had forgotten what he had said. And so it was very hard to watch it again and to hear him say, especially when he said she cried out. He stabbed her, in the chest, and she cried out. And all these years, I have somehow convinced myself that she didn't see it coming, and that possibly she never knew. That's what the police led me to believe, and that's what I convinced myself.
I think they were probably trying to protect you as well, and he was more forthcoming during that interview than he has been ever before.
Ever. He has always strayed away from telling me any kind of truth. I think part of it is he doesn't want to hurt me. I guess I can appreciate that a little bit, but I think what most people don't realize is that not knowing the truth can be far more harmful.
And it seems like it's a little too late for him to worry about hurting you after what he has done to your family.
I suppose.
So he's still behind bars. He talked a lot about his relationship with his parents, and he mentioned, having some problems at home. You finally had an opportunity to sit across from his mother years after this. Tell me what that was like.
Yes, it was actually 25 years after Jennifer's death when we were brought together by a television program. And I can tell you that I very much disliked his parents for those 25 years, and I had no intention of ever reconciling with them, and was very reluctant to participate in that program. But it did turn out to have a very good ending, and his mother was very, very sorry and remorseful, and wanted to hug me. I didn't really want to hug her back, but we had a very good conversation where I realized that she did really try to help her son. And up until that point, I had been of the opinion that they just raised this kid, didn't give him any values. I thought that maybe they had been abusive toward him. Certainly, I didn't think they had given him any boundaries or any curfews. They just sort of, let him go. And of course, let him go to kill my daughter. And then I found out that actually they had tried. They had tried to get him professional help. They didn't like the age difference between our two children any more than I did. And but he was a difficult child to parent. And maybe a little bit they did give up. But I realized she loves her son. And we're two mothers who love our children. And in the end, we really did reconcile.
You both, in different ways, lost your children
Yes,
that
we
day,
did.
too.
We did.
And so I always think about that when I think about how their family was impacted as well. You have devoted now the majority of these years going into schools and talking with kids. What's the message and why?
Yeah, well, I never thought that it would be 33 years of going into schools. And I mean, I have to say, initially the message was a little selfish because I did not want Jenny to be forgotten. I wanted to know that she had lived. And then it really began to occur to me that maybe she could save some lives, that maybe it was making a difference because of the feedback that I would get. And I never thought that it would last this long. And my husband used to say, "When are you going to stop?" And I said, "I guess when the phone stops ringing." I mean, I never made any big effort to try and set up speeches, but the phone continued to ring. And even today, as old as this story is, it is a powerful story. And it's just educating and letting teens know what's healthy and what isn't. And what continues to surprise me is that teens don't seem to know the difference. And just like in Jenny's day, they seem to accept that these jealous, possessive, power and control, whatever you want to call it, that is the norm, and they seem to accept it.
I would agree with that. And you talk about this being an old story, but I think it still resonates with any parent who has a teenage son or daughter. Mm-hmm. I know it resonated with me, and just even based on the social media input that we're getting when people are looking at the promo and hearing that the documentary was coming up, there's still people that remember Jenny from high school, and there are other people saying, "I'm setting the DVR. I'm going to watch this." So I think it is, I know it's powerful, and I know that it is saving some lives out there. Your courage amazes me. And I think if anything amazes me more than your courage, maybe just a little bit, is your ability to forgive. How did you reach the point? We talked about this in the documentary, but I think for many people, when we see you hug Mark, that's a, wow, how did she ever get there?
Well, it was a long time in coming. It certainly, and people who knew us back then in the day knew the rage and the anger that we carried toward him. And they could also tell you how it was destroying us. But a good 8 years we lived with that kind of hatred and rage toward him. And it was a program that the state of Iowa offered where it's restorative justice is kind of one of the names, where you can actually meet with your offender. But it's very closely monitored, and you have a mediator with you. And we chose to go through with that. And when you sit down face to face across from the person who offended you and you ask them questions, some amazing things happen. And that's what we did. And we certainly got out our rage, but we were able to listen to him too. And I think for me, to look at him, to see how he had changed in 8 years. He talked about his day, he showed us pictures of his cell, and to realize that, his life is over. I mean, justice has been served, and I guess his parents can still talk to him, but his life is over. And so slowly it just began to soften our hearts. And we began to realize that, and it's the Christian thing, we are Christians, that to forgive. And it was for us in the end, we were the ones who benefited. And so now we have some sort of a relationship with him, I guess you could say.
You don't go as frequently, right?
No, I think in 33 years we've maybe seen him about 5 or 6 times. But he does call us. He's allowed to call us he calls maybe 4 times a year. And we do have an email account with him. But it's not like we're best buddies. Mm-hmm. And what I say, it's awkward, He's a person without a future, is the way I put it. If I talk to you, I can, what are you going to do next week? Okay, there's none of that with him.
Right.
There is nothing to talk about. And so it's always a little awkward. It's just small chit-chat. But we do have these conversations.
You know, one of the lines that really hit me is when we were wrapping up the interview, and you said, "And to think this was all about your need to control, and now you have none." The irony of that. That kind of gave me chills. But it is. I mean,
Yes.
this act of rage, he says, was because he always had control issues.
Yes.
And now he's in a small cell, and he's told when he can eat, and he gets a certain amount of time out, I guess. So there's absolutely no control in his life. And I can't imagine what that does to him. Has he talked about that with you?
Um, Maybe just a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And I think he did say to me something similar that he said, I was all about control back then, and it didn't take me long behind these walls to realize that I have none. And I remember thinking what a sad thing it was that it took those walls for him to learn that.
Right.
You know, why couldn't he have learned that outside the walls so that both he and Jennifer could have had a life? So I guess that's what, the education is about, that places like Family Resources and like when I go into schools, that's what we're trying to accomplish, so that you don't have to learn it behind prison walls.
So right now, if you were speaking to those teenage boys and teenage girls, what advice would you give them?
Well, I just finished speaking the last 2 days to over 500 students. And certainly try and get across without preaching the fact that, this controlling and this possessiveness is not healthy. And I just try and do that by giving examples. I just don't like it to hand them a list, and I don't like to preach it. I just want them in hearing Jenny's story. I want them to come to that conclusion themselves. But the other thing that is so prevalent is the secrets that teens keep. And throughout Jenny's story, it is so obvious that all of her friends knew. Everybody knew what was going on. And yet her parents, we knew nothing. And so we just try and just drum that in, is that we know, you're being a good friend, and we don't want you to really not be a good friend, but as a teenager, you don't have the resources. You
Right.
need to tell somebody. Don't tell your mom, but is there a coach? Is there, whoever, because you can't really get the help that you need. And we couldn't help Jennifer because she wasn't telling us either. And so that's kind of the other thing that we just try and really emphasize. And the fact that her friends had to take a witness stand and tell that jury that, yeah, we knew it all, and we didn't tell. And the guilt and the sorrow on their faces at that time. I was a little disturbed in these last 2 days to find out that we don't have a lot of education in schools today. In the junior highs, there's nothing. And in the high schools, it seems to be hit and miss. So.
Wow. Especially when you hear from the professionals that there's still a prevalence
Right.
of violent behavior among
Right.
teens.
Right.
To the parents, what do you say to the parents of teens?
Well, I think parents have to be vigilant. Your child's not going to like it, but I think you do. You have to be watching them and paying attention to what's going on. I didn't have to deal with that in the digital age. In fact, yesterday it was so funny. I'm talking about, the landline, and some of these students were like, "What's the
What's a
landline?" So, however you can do it, you have to be aware of really what's going on, and not dismiss it, and think, "Oh, it wouldn't happen here.
Right.
It wouldn't happen at Pleasant Valley High School where Jennifer was a student."
Right.
It does happen, and however you can, get your child to talk and get their trust. But I would also caution that you don't want to be going off. What's the word? You don't want to be scaring them off either, because a lot of teens have told me, well, I would tell my parents, but they would just
Freak out.
Freak out, yes. So if you can find that balance.
Right. And sometimes that's a difficult balance to switch
Yes.
that dial back and forth.
So
Where do you get your strength? You just amaze me.
I don't have any strength. I don't know.
I would disagree.
I don't know. I just, certainly faith in God. Maybe Jenny gives it to me. I don't know. But it's been a hard road. It has.
I can only imagine. Any final thoughts before we wrap up?
I just want to thank you for doing this. I think that the subject probably has not gotten a lot of attention in the last few years, and I guess I'm as shocked as anyone to hear that. Yeah, it's still, that it still needs it. So I appreciate your doing that.
I'm honored to be able to tell the story, and at the same time, I wish I didn't have to. I'm so glad that I got to meet you and got to know you, but I wish it hadn't been for this reason.
Me too. Thanks.
Keep up the good work and let us know how we can help.
All right. Thank
Vicki,
you.
we appreciate it. Thanks.